Welcome to Sincerely Me, a podcast about self-discovery and inner work so you can cultivate a deeper relationship to yourself and show up more fully in your work and life. My name is Tallia and I'm honored to be your host. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. If you've been here before, you know that this podcast, my work, all the things that I do are really in service of helping create the space and time for you to tune in to yourself. And we're pretty quick to look to our outside world, what we're doing, our goals, the people around us, our work, the things in our environments, and maybe reflect on how things are going and how we're doing and what's going on. But we're not as quick and willing to ask ourselves the bigger questions in life, like what it means to live a life of significance, like what it means to heal, like what it means to experience transformation at the deepest level of who you are. And so my hope is that this podcast gives you that time and space and tools to start cultivating that deeper relationship to yourself and really tuning in. So it's no surprise that I invited Dr. Roy Vongtama to be on the podcast with us today. He is many things, but most of his time is spent as a board-certified radiation oncologist working with hundreds of cancer patients. In his work, he is a student of many emotional techniques, a student of positive psychology, much like myself, a student of meditation. He has spent countless hours in meditation, and we end up talking a lot about the value he's found in some of those practices. But today's conversation is really about taking ownership over your health and really making a personal investment in the outcome of your life. We discuss a lot about not just what health really means, but also what disease means, and a little bit about the mind-body connection and how emotional trauma can in fact manifest into physical illness and disease or dis-ease. He teaches me in real time a very effective way to release tension that many of us hold in our bodies. We talk about the psychology of change and how to create momentum when you're trying to make changes when it comes to your health. Again, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. And he shares a bunch of awesome resources, including this incredible book he's written. So all of that he will share with us at the end of the episode, but it's also, of course, linked in the show notes. And lastly, before I share the conversation I had with Roy, I wanted to share his response to the question I asked him at the end. And if you've listened to the podcast before, you know that I ask all of my guests what it means to them to live a life of significance. And why I want to actually start by sharing his answer is because I think it paints a beautiful picture of Roy and who he is and where he comes from and what his perspective is, because that definitely informs the conversation, that informs his practice as a doctor, as a human being, and as someone who really exemplifies what it means to live a life of significance. And so his response to that question was that a life of significance is a victorious life, and a victorious life is not necessarily an easy one. In fact, it requires a willingness to go into the places that are hard for you and putting your effort there, knowing that there could be the possibility of failure, but also of success. He said, if you're not taking risks, you're not growing. And if you're not growing, you're not living. The victorious life in that sense means taking chances to grow every day. So with that being said, here is my conversation with Dr. Roy Vongtama. So we have a lot to discuss today. When Roy and I were planning some of the talking points, we were like, great, so we need 5 hours to get through everything. So we're going to try to hit some of the most important and key points for you all listening today. And Roy, I'm going to ask you to start with this idea that you presented to me, which is, how important it is for us to take ownership over our health and really feel a sense of personal responsibility when it comes to not just physical health, but mental, emotional, like all these different parts of who we are. So let's chat a little bit about what that means. What does it mean to take ownership, and how would you suggest folks really gain that sense of responsibility when it comes to their health in all the different aspects of themselves.
Yeah, that's a really, really great. I'm glad we're starting with that. So ownership to me means really having a personal investment in the outcome of your life. And when I talk about health, I talk about in terms of mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. So um, most people in America, especially in the generations that have passed and the ones that are still upcoming in different parts of the country, they tend to rely a lot on what doctors tell them. And the majority of people still go to Western doctors only. And, you rely on the doctor to give you information and give you stuff to do, right? And they give you tests to do. But what I've found is that when you do that, you give up that level of mental control to your own health journey. You don't actually check in if this thing is right for me. So a lot of what I teach people to do is like, is this right for me? Is this good for me? Just because someone tells you to do something doesn't mean you have to do it. And that doesn't, that's a very general statement. But when you go to a doctor, maybe they want you to do something or not want to do something. You have to check in with yourself to make sure if that's right for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I work in oncology, the cancer space. I'll always present the patient like, look, these are your options, but what do you want to do? And some people get really upset about that because they want to be told what to do. And I'm like, look, it's not my life. I can give you the options, and so when I talk about ownership, it's really about finding that place in yourself, making decisions for yourself, given the information and the training you have and the people around you, doing what's best for you, and making an effort in your own life to actually do it on your own, not relying on doctors or acupuncturists or psychologists or priests or anybody to do it, but do it on your own, and then use other people to support you. And when you take that kind of attitude, everything changes, because then the world will be like, oh, this person really wants to make a change. And now how can we support that change? And Talia, I know you talk to a lot of people. When you talk to people who have ownership in their lives and have that integrity, you can feel that energy. It's different, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's
Mm-hmm.
a vibration. I would use the word that shows that this person's alive. They're really taking ownership of the situation.
That makes total sense. And I think a lot of it comes down to being able to trust yourself and being able to really listen to your needs. And we talk a lot about that, in various episodes of this podcast. And that's something that we don't really learn. We don't learn how to do that. We don't learn how to trust ourselves. We don't learn how to listen to our bodies and the subtle messages and cues that we get. And we learn in, Western culture, I guess I'd say, how to think about health, and it tends to be in a very kind of limited way. To back to the points we made earlier, we don't tend to think about health in all these different, spiritual health, mental health, emotional health, and how they're all tied together. So what I want to explore next is
Mm-hmm.
is about kind of how have you come to understand disease specifically, and
Yeah,
share a little bit more about the connection, right? Like the mind body connection, and how emotional, and some things that I've
sure.
picked up on from you in terms of the research I've done, and from your website and the content you put out, is how our emotional trauma can actually cause illness. So let's chat about that connection, and how are these things all related?
Yeah. Well, I'll share a personal story on that note. So my father's a cancer doctor as well. And in the field that we're in, you have a physicist that actually helps you do the treatment. And when I was really young, I used to go in my dad's clinic, and his partner got lung cancer. And I was like 9. I asked my dad, I said, Dad, how could this guy, I mean, you guys are trying to cure lung cancer. How could he get it? And not only did he get it, but he passed away from it within a year. And so it just shocked me even at that young age. And I was like, I don't understand how this is what you do, that you can't fix this thing. And, when I was 10, it's a very simple mindset, but actually I still have the same mindset. I still, even to this day, still think about, okay, what is missing here? What's going on? And I'm an MD. I trained in Western medicine, and I did a 5-year residency at UCLA, but I found that it's limiting in the way that Western medicine understands health, because it only understands health in terms of illness. It doesn't understand it in terms of healing and of stopping things before they start.
Mm.
So I decided, okay, well, I have to do my own training, because I didn't really feel like I was getting any training in that. So Talia, like we said, I started studying psychology, cognitive behavioral therapy, how to work with the mind, and I took courses in that. And the emotional work, because of my background as an actor, I knew that, like, myself personally, I had a lot of issues with anger and not actually accessing it. So I started to look at what it happens to you when you suppress anger. What happens when you suppress trauma? And and then I realized, on top of that, I needed something that I could do on my own that wasn't mental and that wasn't emotional. And that's when I started meditation.
Mm.
And so I realized that all of them are necessary for health. There's a quote by Dr. Becker. He says, "There's many diseases, but only one health." And I really love that quote, because it doesn't matter where you are. If you're listening, you have diabetes, or you have high blood pressure, or you're overweight, or you're depressed, or you have anxiety, there's only one health. And that health is the same for all of us. It's when you're happy, you can move around in your body, you're feeling good, you have energy, you sleep well. It's the same thing. It doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it whatever you want to call it, but your goal is the same. Everybody in this world listening to this podcast has the same goal, is to get to this one health. And that health is physical, mental, emotional, spiritual in one. That's the only way, to me, you can really feel healthy. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
Yeah.
love that you have found such a beautiful way to bring all these different worlds and philosophies and practices together in order to be able to nurture and heal all these different parts of ourselves. And you told me previous to recording the episode that you've done over 7,000 hours of meditation. And
Yes.
as someone who's really hoping and trying to build a meditation practice, I would love to know, both for yourself first and then for all your patients and the folks you work with, how has meditation, what role has that played, again, in your own life, and what role do you see it
Mhm.
playing in healing the folks you work with who have disease, who have illnesses? Because again, I think it's very common to either go to a medical doctor from like a very scientific background to go to, like, you're either going into that world or you're going the alternative route with the kind of woo woo. I'm all about the woo, so I'm so in
Right.
that world. But I think it is important to acknowledge that both of these sides have a lot of value and serve different functions, sometimes overlapping functions. So let's chat about meditation and the role that that's played in healing, again, both for yourself and the folks you work with.
Yeah, and that Talia, totally right on point with what you just said. So for me, I always thought, there's $7 trillion of research in the West. There's 7,000 years of experience in the East. Why not do them both? And that's where it's like when you go to a buffet, you don't just go to one side, right? You go to both sides. And to me, that was always the smartest thing. And so when I kind of felt this space in me where I wasn't feeling fully kind of like fulfilled, I really started to, that's one of the monks that I train with. He said to me, he goes, when you're having a hard time, and he was talking about God. He said, do you go towards or away? And when he said God, I translated that to mean, do you go inward to see if the answer is there, or do you go outward?
Mm.
Right now in the world, especially in America too, it's all outward. It's always like, you need to lose more weight. You need to change your diet. But all that stuff is outside of you. And so for meditation, it's really, really cool for me, because what it involves is relaxation, and number two is concentration. And those are two things that we don't have enough of in this world. If you can put relaxation with concentration and put it together, you're going to get a state of peace. That's the result. Relaxation plus concentration equals peace. Now you can tell I'm a scientist, right? Because I made it into a formula, but it's transformed how I see patients. If I see them and they have a lot of anxiety, I go, "Have you tried meditation?" And they'll be like, "Oh, I've heard about it. I've seen it on TV. I'm like, "Yeah, you ever done it?" I'm like, "No." I'm like, "Do you want to try it?" And they're like, oh yeah. I'm like, okay, let's do it right now. And I'll be like, and they'll be like, what? I'm like, yeah, right now. And I'm like, and they're like, okay. So I'll close the door and I'll teach them a very brief, quick meditation technique. And it's transformed people's lives right there, because people hear that word meditation and they think, oh, that's something I can't do. I tried it. My mind moves too fast. But really, what meditation is simply what I just said, is getting the body relaxed and then focusing on a point, maybe somewhere between your eyebrows, and just trying to keep your mind there for a little bit. And it's really easy to do. It's simple, and the benefits of it are being proven more and more now,
Mhm.
which is a decrease in anxiety, decrease in stress hormones. We're watching rewiring of the brain. The brain changes shape in terms of the structure of the neuronal structure. And on functional MRI, they're seeing a lot of really cool changes with people who meditate longer periods of time.
Mhm.
And for me personally, in my own health, it's the single biggest thing I've done, bigger than the psychology, bigger than the emotional work, because it kind of is underneath everything. And if people are interested in my book, I have a book, Healing Before You're Cured. You'll see in the diagram of my book, I have spiritual as the middle. And the reason why is because it affects everything outside
Mhm.
of it.
Mhm.
And the research is really, really clear on this. If you do only 7 minutes twice a day, and you can skip, one period a week. If you do 7 minutes twice a day, it'll put you over 90 minutes. That's the amount that you need to have to get gains in terms of anxiety, depression level, hormones, stress hormone levels. So it's not that much, actually. And I ask people, do you have 7 minutes in the morning or 7 minutes at night? And they're like, no. I'm like, so you don't have 7 minutes for yourself, is what you just told me. And
Mhm.
they're like, oh. I'm like, so that's why you're sitting in a cancer clinic right now,
Yeah.
because you haven't I didn't even ask about meditation. I just asked, you have 7 minutes. That's where I start with people, and they're like, no, I don't have that. Okay. So I get people when I'm looking to get them started in meditation, I'm like, do you have 1 minute? Do you have 1 minute right now? And the reason why I started tying in emotional health and emotional trauma, I know I'm running a little bit longer on this answer, but the reason why I got there is because when I tried to get people to sit still for a minute, it would bring up so much emotion right at that moment. And I found that you can't really meditate till you clear out that emotional space, though. So if I get you relaxed and try to focus inward, the first thing that's going to come up is emotion. And so that's where I started looking into to trauma, emotional trauma. And that's kind of, you mentioned that before.
Mhm.
It's a big factor in health. There's a lot of research coming out about it, showing how childhood trauma. Well, let me ask you, Talia. So if I'll give you 10 factors that they looked at in the research of over like 15, 30,000 people with trauma from under the age of 18. There's emotional neglect, physical neglect, sexual abuse, mental abuse, physical abuse, um, separated family, separated parent. If they witness domestic violence, someone died in the family, there's an incarceration, meaning someone went to prison, a parent, or addiction or alcohol abuse. Those are the 10 factors that they looked at.
Mhm.
What percentage of Americans have one of those?
Oh, you know what's really I'm just like having such a moment of gratitude because I'm like, wow, I've never experienced any of those.
Wow.
And that's like
Okay.
massive because I'm assuming that the percentage is really freaking high.
So yeah, it's 70% of Americans have experienced one of those.
Wow.
Out of that, out of that 65 to 70% that have experienced one, how many have experienced more than one?
Ugh, probably just as much.
Yes. So 70% of the 70%, basically 2 out of 3 people have experienced more than one of those
Yeah.
things, which makes sense, right? If you have a dad who's an alcoholic, he probably hits your not. It doesn't have to be a dad, but let's say a parent who's an alcoholic maybe abuses the other spouse,
Right.
and maybe abuses you verbally. So that you have 3 right there,
Mhm.
you know. And if he hits you, then you have 4, and then if he went to jail, then you have 5.
Yeah.
And if you have those things in your life, if you're one of those, if you're listening, you're like me. Okay. I score, I think, a 2 out of 10, but some of the people listening may have a 6 or 7. And now the issue that they found is that these things are linked to disease later on. So if you have an increase, they used to call the ACEs scores, adverse child experience study scores. If you have a score, you have an increased risk in diabetes, increased risk of heart disease, increased risk of cancer, increased risk of suicide, um, increased risk of having 50 or more sexual partners. There's many different things that these things lead to. And if you listen to what I just said, and autoimmune disease as well. So if you think of all the diseases I just said, there's autoimmune disease, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, sexual promiscuity. If you think about that, that's basically your whole life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these kind of emotional traumas, if they're not addressed, if they're not dealt with over your life, they're going to lead to problems, not just on their own, but because they promote behaviors in yourself that you're trying to survive,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're trying to live. So maybe you start smoking because you were abused, that can lead to cancer, right? And if you've been physically abused, maybe the only way you experience love is through sexual contact.
Mm-hmm.
So that could lead you to sexual diseases like HIV. So you have so many things, and if none of those things work, you turn towards suicide.
Yeah.
So a lot of these things are all connected, and it's so important to actually take a look at these. That's why I created the system, my Houses of Health system, because I was like, wait, I can't just talk about meditation, because if they try to meditate and they have these sadness or anger coming up, they got to deal with the emotional
Right.
house. So then I started looking into that, and I give people exercises and practical things they can do on their own. Of course, I'd say though, if you do, or you're listening, you have this undealt with trauma, and there's a lot of it. It's really difficult to do it fully on your own, which is why I always recommend therapy, and it's been found to be very effective and for people who have a lot of trauma. And some people deal with it on their own. I have some people I work with, where I coach, that I'm like, yeah, I scored a 5, and I'm like, wow, you're great. She's like, wow, I've done a lot of journaling. I did a lot of inward work. I've done a lot of meditation. I've done a lot of retreats. So there's a way to do it on your own if you're a person like that. But most of us, it helps to have someone who can listen to you. That's not necessarily invested in the outcome of the conversation. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. There was so much there that we can pull apart. I think, I see this a lot. So I hosted a retreat not too long ago that invited women to come together for a day to rest and unplug and be alone with themselves. And about half of the day was spent in silence. And it was so clear to me, and even in my own experience, how uncomfortable that can be. So I definitely can relate to some of the resistance that comes with finding time for yourself, whether it's 1 minute or an
Mm-hmm.
hour a day. It's but why it's important is because if there's resistance there, it's because deep down there's something you're ignoring, something that needs attention that
Mm-hmm.
you're not giving attention to.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be really hard to hold space for whatever needs to come up, which is why, yes, absolutely encourage folks to find therapists, coaches, energy healers, doctors, like
Yeah.
get support. It's not a path you have to travel alone. But having that time and space to ask yourself, what am I avoiding? What's going on in here? What emotional trauma? And traumas don't have to be there's a spectrum of trauma, and I'm not by any means a trauma expert, so like no one quote me on this, but I think when we use the word trauma, we think of these like really intense life altering events, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that. I think they're just like wounds, emotional wounds, pain that's unresolved, um, in small ways and big, that we, out of protection, like just don't want to excavate because it hurts and it's painful to go back there. But to your point, the longer these things sit, the more likely they are to show up in other ways,
Yeah.
not just in other emotional ways, but clearly in physical ways as well.
Yeah, and that's really true. I mean, like if you look at, I'm always talking in terms of science, but if you look at the laws of motion, one of them is momentum. And momentum's a principle where things in motion stay in motion. And if you have an energy in you, now I'm getting a little metaphysical, but if you have an energy in you of this like anger, and is a pattern in your body, it keeps going and going and going. It grows because it starts to create momentum in you, and it doesn't go away. That's the thing. One thing I always talk about in terms of emotional states is that people think, oh, I can't deal with that now. Especially at work, if someone says something, you can't blast off on them and scream at them,
Mhm.
right? You could, but then you'd have to go down to HR and there'd be an incident report. So there's things you can't do in this world. So you end up going, I can't have that reaction. And you don't want to feel that. So you kind of like sequester it. You kind of put it to the side. And then you go on about your day, then you have lunch, and then you have the rest of your day, and you think that it's gone, but it's not. And you see that, I mean, it's not an uncommon thing. You taking work home with you. That's the phrase, right? Say, he's taking work home with him. He's really frustrated. That's because they're suppressing emotion, and it's not necessarily trauma per se, but it's something that's happened to you that gave you an emotional response, but you're not able to actually process it in a healthy way. So you just put it to the side. And then maybe on the way home from work, you stop at a bar, have a couple drinks, and you feel a little bit more relaxed physically. So you think that emotionally you're better. But if you've ever seen somebody who's drunk, you know that there's a lot of stuff underneath. Sometimes you're a happy drunk, sometimes you become an angry drunk. So but is that because of the alcohol? No, it's because of what's underneath. So it's really important for people listening. Is that's partly why we created this free email course that people can access, and you can go through and see if that's something you need to work on. We have a 16 question free quiz that we have. It's a healthy habits quiz. They can access it through our website, mdroy.com. Or if they're listening and they're driving, you can, not while you're driving, but if you text the word HEAL, HEAL, to the number 345-345, HEAL at 345-345, you'll get linked up with this free quiz. And it'll help you look to see if this is something you need to actually take a look at
Yeah.
in your life.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll be sharing all the resources in the show notes for folks to direct themselves to. That reminds me of something I've known for a while, but has recently resurfaced for me, is how, like, on the outside, especially career-wise, work-wise, I'm a lot less stressed than I typically am. I'm like, no,
Mm.
things are fine. I'm not stressed at all. When my mind might be thinking that I'm not stressed, but my body might be feeling very differently. And
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed how, again, I don't feel stressed in the typical ways that I've thought about stress up until now, but from the coaching and the perspectives and the people around me, I've really recognized how my body feels the exact opposite right now, and how
Mm.
I'm, again, maybe not stressed externally or from the mental perspective, but how my body feels very much in fight or flight mode. And how
Mm.
I'm like so not in a relaxed state of being just from like a physical level, which is strange because, again, I'm like, but no, I'm not stressed. Like, everything's fine, right? Like, there's no reason for me to be stressed. But
Sure.
so there's this like disconnect that I'm starting to just notice and work with and try to understand a little bit better. But
Yeah.
again, I think can easily be ignored because my mind, at least I'll speak for myself, is rationalizing all the reasons why things are good. I'm okay, like nothing's wrong. Work is going well, relationships going well, puppy's healthy, like all the, check, 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 check down the list. But why does my body feel differently? Are there emotional traumas, big or small, that are unresolved? To which,
Yeah.
I'm finding the answer is yes. And so there's a lot of work to do there. And I think just because things on the outside are looking great, it's no indication that things are on a deeper level just as great. So um,
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question. So you said that you notice that your body's different than where your mind is. What are you actually feeling in your
yeah,
body?
great question. So I notice a couple things. I notice that it's hard for me to take like full breaths.
Mm.
My breaths are very short and very shallow. And even when I
Hmm.
try to take a full breath, it's like I have to like really put a lot of effort into it. which I know from some of
Okay.
the work I'm doing, there's a bit of a like constriction in my diaphragm that's happening.
Okay.
So there's that. There's also just like, and I'm sure most people feel tension in my shoulders and in my neck. I also have, this is like a lot of information, but here I am saying it. I have like very, very, very painful cycles monthly. There's usually
Okay.
one day where there's like a 3 to 4 hour chunk of time where I can't move, I can't do anything. I'm laying in bed and I kind of just tell myself it's normal because periods are painful, but I'm also trying to understand what could be going on there that
Hmm.
is creating the pain.
Yeah.
Other things in my
Well,
body. Yeah, go ahead.
That's pretty good. So I mean, not that's when I said pretty good. It mean there's a lot of stuff that you notice, but it's really good that you're so aware to actually identify what it is.
Mhm.
You want me to show you a way to get rid of it in a couple breaths?
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's do it right now. So what you're describing is tension.
Mhm.
It's physical tension in the body, right?
Yeah.
And if you ever been in an argument with a loved one and they tell you to relax, hey, just relax. That doesn't work, right? It
It
doesn't
does
work.
the
You do the
opposite.
exact
Yeah,
opposite.
yeah.
Right. So this is the trick. This is the trick. So the body doesn't know how to relax, but it knows how to tense. So what we're going to do is make the body completely tense.
Mhm.
And then you will automatically go the opposite way in relaxation.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is you're going to inhale and tense your whole body, including your face. Inhale, tense the whole body, and then exhale. Do it again. Inhale. Tense the whole body. Exhale. One more time. Exhale. How do you feel?
Feels like my whole body's just like melting into my chair.
Yeah. So that's how you do it. So anybody listening, if you're experiencing anything like what Talia was experiencing, it's not you don't need to have a rocket science degree. That it's tension in your body from whatever reason. So you're gonna make it tense. You tense the whole body on an inhale, then exhale. You're hyper oxygenating your lungs. You're causing relaxation in every single muscle in your body. And if you do it 3 times, you're getting the full effect. Because the first time you may not be able to completely let go, but by the third time you will.
Mm.
So that's one of the things I teach people all the time is tense and relax. So it's a really powerful, simple way to get out of that space and into your body and into your breath.
Yeah.
So, um, I'm glad that you had that experience. But there's also another thing, that I noticed when you were saying is because your mind is so powerful and you're trained in positive psychology too, is that, there's, there's something even more important than being positive, and that's being real. So when we talked about ownership back in the beginning, that's what we have to be is real first, and once you're really taking ownership in that moment, and which is what you're doing when you're tense and relaxing. That's one way to do it. Is to also be real and say, okay, now that I'm relaxed, what is actually going on in me? And that's another thing I teach is called how do I feel?
Mhm.
And it's simply asking yourself, how do I feel? And then doing what you just did, which is, if I say, how do I feel? I have some tension in my shoulders right now. How do I feel? Oh, my hands are a little tense. The microphone is a little bit too low, so I think I'm crouching and my neck's hurting a little bit. How do I feel? I have a little heaviness in my chest. I saw a difficult patient earlier. It made me a little sad, you know. So even in 3 questions, I already found some things that I can let go of,
Yeah.
you know.
Mhm.
And so if you combine the tense to relax with this how do I feel activity for yourself, asking yourself, just checking back in, it forces you to ask yourself, how do you feel? And that's the beginning of taking ownership.
Yeah, putting language to it. One thing that I've probably said it before on the podcast, and I know we talked about it at the most recent retreat I facilitated, but the language around that statement is so important because you're acknowledging a feeling versus a state of being. And what I mean by that is a lot of times we'll say things like, I am sad. I am
Hmm.
happy. I am
Hmm.
frustrated. You are not frustration or sadness or happiness. Those things are not a part of who you are. They're fleeting emotions that you experience. So, even
Right.
in the semantics of it, like noticing how you put language to the things you feel and recognizing that you're feeling a certain way, not that you are a certain way. That's just
Right.
a note that I always like to make because I see it so often. And I catch myself in that too. I'm so stressed. I'm
Hmm.
feeling stressed, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, just a distinction I like to make now and then because it's an easy indication of kind of your mental state.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that ties back into both of our training with cognitive behavioral therapy and positive psychology, because I am stressed is a global statement about
Yeah.
yourself, and I feel stressed. Yeah, exactly. It's temporary. It can go away.
Mm-hmm.
Even so it's, and that's, for people listening, that's found to be linked to depression, increase in anxiety if you tend to globalize all your statements
Yeah.
like that. It's being aware of how you phrase things.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like woo woo new age stuff. This is
Yeah.
like, it's been studied in multiple hundreds of studies that phrasing is really important.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So
great point.
I want to bring up a post that you recently published on Instagram. It's an image of two plants, and you'll probably be able to explain the image better than I will. But I'm going to go ahead and read the caption because I think there's so much there to explore as well, and then we'll wrap up with a few final questions. So it's a picture of the same plant, but they're potted differently. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So the first picture, can you explain the pictures and then I'll read the caption?
Sure. So it's a picture of a plant in a pot, on my counter, and it's just got one stem, and it's got about ten leaves on it, and it looks pretty healthy. It's kind of, not really. But the other picture is the exact same plant in open ground with no pot,
Mm-hmm.
and it's got about 1,000 stems, and it fills up the picture, and you can't see the end of it. So those are the two pictures we see.
Perfect. Okay. So now we have a visual. So the caption you wrote was just like this plant and the soil it grows in, our mental house determines how much we can grow and expand. The limiting thoughts in your mind are like the walls of the pot in that first photo. The plant lives, but not that well. The abundant and non fear producing thoughts are like the plant in the second photo. Remove those thoughts, and your life will grow to its potential size. These are the
Mm,
same species of plant, same genes, same potential. We just have to get the old programming out of our heads so we can live to our fullest. I love this because it's
yeah.
such a great way to like conceptualize this idea. But it's totally about like what are the boundaries we're putting around ourselves? How are we limiting ourselves? How do we break through some of those barriers and really expand in the way we're meant to, in the way we're supposed to. And so let's chat a little bit about the idea behind the mental house itself, and maybe what to do if you're feeling constricted in a little pot that's like too constricting and no longer serving you.
Yeah, it's a great. Thank you for bringing that post up. It's it's the mental house to me is really, it's what we've trained in. It's how you think about yourself. It's the story you're telling yourself all the time, and a lot of it is built on a tape that you got either from the media, or you got from mostly from your parents, probably from your household upbringing, and it's helped you to survive to this point, right? But if you wanna optimize your life, you got to do better. You're gonna want to do more than survive, and part of it is letting yourself go beyond what you're comfortable with. Beyond, they have this phenomenon that, the cage door phenomenon. When in Asia, when they train elephants, well, I call it cage door, but when they train elephants, they keep a chain around the baby elephant's neck, and the elephant knows that it can't break the chain because it's not strong enough. And by the time it's an adult, they don't even have to use a chain anymore. They just use a light rope, because the elephant remembers what that chain is. So it doesn't think it can get beyond the rope anymore. And that a lot is like of what the picture in the plants are saying, is that, what thoughts are in you now that are holding you back. And I like to term it blind spots. So it's like, what if there's an area in your life that's not going well? Where is your blind spot? And a lot of it is in your mind. So if you take for example, I'll tell a story of my friend. I wanted to help her lose some weight, and I gave her a gift, and my gift was like, I'll walk around the block with you once a week, just to get her going. And she's like, oh my God, thank you so much for this. And I'm like, okay, let's start next week. She's like, great. So it was Monday and we are supposed to go. She texts me and she's like, I can't I can't do it today because of whatever reason. And then I'm like, no worries, let's do it next Monday. And we happened to say Monday was the day. Second time Monday came around, she's like, well, I have an appointment, I can't do it. This went on for a few times and basically we never did it. And I saw her a year later, and I said, hey, what happened? Can you tell me where your blind spot is on this one issue? Why can't you take this walk with me? And it's very specific. I wanted to know, and I used the word blind spot. And she said, I haven't thought of that. Why? And I was like, wow, she never thought of it, first of all, right? Why? And she sat there, and because I used the word blind spot, she was like, well, I'm afraid if I go to the end of the block, I won't be able to make it back. So there's no way I could get around the block. So it was when I said, take a walk around the block, because she felt she couldn't even get back from going down the block at all. She was never going to agree to go because in her mind, she couldn't get down the block. So how could she go around it? And I was like, okay, well, let's rephrase then. Let's just make it, how about we just go to the end of the block? I'll just come and we'll walk to a half a block and then we'll walk back. And she's like, oh, I can do that. And so we have that plan on Monday. So a lot of times when we're trying to change, it's like we try to make big, huge, life-changing changes all at once. And if you look at the research on change, that's not how change works. It changes with small steps. So she's 80 pounds overweight. We're not going to address that. But what we can address is getting her half the block.
Yeah.
And so that's what I try to get people to do in taking ownership, is find the thing that you need to change in your life. Maybe it is losing weight, but make a small step that you can win, that you can succeed, and make a deal with yourself to do it for a week. That's all. Take a half a block walk, or as far as you feel you can. Maybe it's only up the stairs or down the stairs or whatever it is. Make it a win, though, so you can win. And when you win, you'll create momentum. And when you create momentum, then you create change.
Totally. Yeah. Love that. Thank you for sharing that story.
Sure.
Awesome. Well, again, we could keep talking for hours, but I do want to be respectful of your time. So I would love to close out by asking two of the questions I offer to all of my guests on the podcast. And the first is what it means to you to live a life of significance.
Okay. To live a life of significance, to me, is in this quote. So there's an Indian yogi, Paramahansa Yogananda. He said, a victorious life is not an easy life. And I think that to me is what a life of significance is going to the places that are hard for you or for me even, and putting a lot of effort into those areas, knowing that there could be failure in them. But in that failure, there's going to be success as well. Because if you're not risking, you're not growing. If you're not growing, you're not living.
Yeah.
So to me, that's what it is. Life of significance is a victorious life, meaning taking chances in your own personal sphere to grow every day.
Yeah. Not just choosing what's easy.
Yes. And some people, and that's what I was talking to another friend, and she's like, why are you always talking about trauma and how the difficult things? She's like, my life is great. I go to church and I have a job and things are great. We have plenty of money. Nobody's sick. It's great every day. And I'm like, well, that to me is not a victorious life, though, because there's work that person has to do. They're just not ready to do it. They're not willing to look,
Yeah, absolutely. That willingness to look and be open to whatever comes, even if it's not quote unquote good.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Awesome. And then my last question for you. So, as you know, the name of the podcast is Sincerely Me. So, it's this
Mhm.
idea that if we were to just spend more time with ourselves, talk to ourselves, write ourselves letters, that we would uncover certain things, that we would cultivate that relationship and ultimately show up in a bigger way. So, if you could write a letter to yourself,
Mhm.
past, present, future, any point in time, what would you want to say to yourself?
Okay, so that's funny because I I have took me right back to this moment where I was I'll tell you the situation just briefly. I'd met this girl that I really liked when I was 16, and all my friends were telling me that she'd never, why are you going to call her? She doesn't like you, or, and I called her on a payphone. That's back where I was young, so now there's payphones, but I called her and she's like, "Oh, hey." And I was like, "Hey." I was like, "Hey, do you want to go out with me?" And she's like, "Yeah." She's like, "How about we meet at this bar?" And I was like, "Okay." And she gave me the date and everything. And I got off the phone. I went to my friends and they're like, "Dude, you're 16. How could you meet her at a bar? She's totally just blowing you off." And one of my friends is like, I'll go with you. I'll go with you. He's like, my dad will drive us over there because we hadn't had our licenses yet at this point. Maybe we were almost 16. And so we went to the bar and there's this guy standing outside and his dad goes, "Are you guys sure you want to go in there?" And my friend looked at me and I was like, "No, let's just go home. You know, you guys are right. She's not in there. There's no way. It's a bar. Why would she be there?" So I went home. I talked to her like 6 years later because she was dating my friend at the time. And I asked her, "Can I ask you a question?" And she's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Were you in the bar?" She's like, "Yeah, I waited for you for 2 hours." And I said, "Well, there's this guy out front. He looked really mean and stuff." She's like, "Yeah, that was my brother." He didn't want you to come in, but he would have let you in had you asked. And after that, I wrote a letter to myself. I said, "You will never do that ever again. If you have something you want to do in your life, you're going to do it. It doesn't matter what anybody says to you because now you know how it feels to not do that." So I have this letter and I have it. I still have it. And it says, "Do the thing that scares you. Be true to yourself."
Hmm.
And that wasn't, oh, it's only 2 lines, but that was the letter. I was 16.
Well, but
So
I mean, I think that's profound because it sounds like it still rings true today.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And in writing this book, that was a big thing because people are like, "Oh, are you sure you want to write this book?" It's like other doctors are going to think you're weird. They may not refer you patients anymore. You're going outside the medical paradigm. You're going to be made fun of. And I had to get over that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this people need to know this information, and on a personal level, I can't not do something because I'm afraid.
Yeah.
That's exactly why I have to do it.
Yes. What a strong message, and I think such a good reminder that we can all use on a daily basis because fear never goes away.
Right.
Never goes away. Wonderful. Well, I would love for you. I know you've sprinkled in some freebies and downloads here and there, but where can people find more about you? Please share again about your book. And I know you mentioned the quiz as well, and I'll link all of that in the show notes, but feel free to let everyone know how they can contact you, get more from you, and
Perfect.
see all the great work you're doing.
Well, there's a bunch of ways. So people who want to take the free email course, they can text the word HEAL, HEAL, to 345-345. That's the phone number, 345-345. Text the word HEAL, and it'll give you a prompt for your email, and then you'll get our free email course. Or you can go to my website, mdroy.com, mdroy.com, and you can sign up there. You can also find us on Instagram with that's a little bit harder. It's Roy Vongtama, Vongtama, Roy Vongtama, MD, and you can see all our posts, like the plant posts that we're talking about there. And if you're interested to jump right into the book, we have it 3 ways. We have an ebook, we have a print book, and we have an audio book on Audible, and the book's available on Amazon. So it's a pretty low cost, so those are the main ways: the email course, the book, and the website and the Instagram.
Perfect. Well, I'll be sure to direct everybody your way, and wanted to thank you again for reaching out and wanting to share your work and all these insights with us on the podcast. I so greatly appreciate it, Roy.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks, Talia, for having me on.
Well, that was my conversation with Dr. Roy Vongtama. I so enjoyed getting to know him, and I would highly encourage y'all to give him a follow on Instagram. He shares so many awesome practical tips and tools to really help you optimize your health, again, in every way: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. He pops in every now and then and records a quick video about the importance of meditation, journaling, mindfulness, and is so dedicated to really helping heal and cure people of illness, whether it's after they've been diagnosed or before. Other things from me: as you all know, the Inner Work Circle is about to head into its application process for our second group that will start in January. So you can still go ahead and add your name to that waitlist. I have already begun sending out some early applications to folks who've expressed interest. If you're unfamiliar and want to know what the Inner Work Circle is, the quick bird's eye view is that the Inner Work Circle is a year-long program for small groups of women who are ready to take the risks, to identify opportunities for growth within themselves, and who are ready to kind of slow down the pace of life and ask themselves these bigger questions. Who am I? What is getting in my way? How do I really want to start being and showing up in the world? We don't set goals in the Inner Work Circle. We're not talking about achievement and accomplishment. We're talking about shifting the way that you feel. We're talking about shifting your state of existence. We're talking about taking ownership over the things you've done. We're talking about nurturing your needs and paying attention to the things within yourself that really are calling for your attention, creating that space and time to cultivate that relationship. And what that looks like is weekly coaching lessons that come from me, in addition to monthly group coaching calls, in addition to 2 retreats, getaway in-person retreats throughout the year. We are gearing up for our February retreat, which is going to be held in Austin, Texas. Just booked the house. So excited to meet this incredible group of women. We also host the program in an online social network called Mighty Networks. And Mighty Networks really enables us to facilitate these conversations and have dialogue and really build a community around these conversations. It's easy for us to listen to podcasts and read books, but still feel kind of isolated on our own journeys of self-discovery and inner work and transformation. And my goal for the Inner Work Circle was to create a space where women could come together and really talk about the things they really felt like they needed to talk about with themselves, with me, and with each other. And so that's a little bit more about the Inner Work Circle. As always, you can reach out to me, shoot me an email, shoot me a DM on Instagram. Happy to share more about the program if you're feeling called to make some changes in your life on a much deeper level. If you did enjoy today's conversation with Roy, let us know by rating and reviewing the podcast. We love hearing your thoughts. It's super helpful to us as we continue creating content for the podcast. Other than that, you can find a lot more content from me on Instagram at Tallia Deljoux. Shoot us an email, sincerelymepodcast@gmail.com, and other goods of mine on my website, talliadeljoux.com. I have 2 awesome new freebies. One is my top 10 favorite questions for coaching and reflection that you can download, in addition to a quick really worksheet that can help you understand how fear is showing up for you in your life right now and moving through it if you're feeling stuck in fear. So check all of those things out on my website. They are there for you. Thank you all for tuning in. We will catch you on next week's episode. Sincerely, me.